I study the use of market-based tools like insurance to decrease climate vulnerability. Index insurance is a relatively new technique used to provide insurance in places where it's never been available before. My research looks at the policies and actors attempting to promote index insurance in an international arena, and I do fieldwork in Kenya to understand how these projects work on the ground.
Imagine you are a small rural farmer. You have many worries. Some years you plant your crops and get good yields. But other years, too much rain destroys your crops. Other years, the rain fails at the time it is most needed. Nearby family and friends can't help much, since they are also farmers and have suffered from the same events. To cope, you may have to sell your animals or land, stop paying your children's school fees, or reduce the amount of food your family consumes. Around 2005, economists studying these problems had an idea. They worked with scientists to find a tool to remotely measure the weather damage done to crops. If you and your neighbors bought insurance, you would all get the same rate of payment according to a satellite or weather station reading for your geographic area. This reading is called an index. Insurers and the global reinsurers who insure them were excited because they hoped this might be an inexpensive way to reach a whole new client base, the world's 600 million smallholder farmers. Development practitioners working for aid agencies of rich country governments saw index insurance as a win-win idea that might achieve two policy objectives at once: decreasing farmers' vulnerability to weather shocks and climate change, and encouraging private market-based tools for agricultural development. So they funded pilot projects to test the idea, often reducing the price of the premiums by subsidizing the insurers.
My research works to understand the expectations and concerns of all of these different actors, and to show how each of their interests have ultimately shaped the development intervention. In the beginning, everyone had high expectations that index insurance was going to catch on quickly as a market and decrease farmers' vulnerability to extreme weather. This was followed by bitter disappointment. There was still low demand from farmers, and there were no examples of projects with enough buyers willing to pay sufficient premiums to make them commercially sustainable for insurers without donor subsidies.
So what happened? As a farmer, the policy was still expensive for you, and there was a bigger problem. If you lost your own crops, but the index for your area didn't indicate a severe event, then you didn't receive a payout. Insurers found it much harder to sell index insurance than they anticipated, and some stopped selling the products because it required spending too many resources on client education and product distribution. And instead of creating a competitive market for reinsurance coverage for index products, tens of millions of dollars of donor subsidies went to a very few large companies who had expertise pricing these contracts. Yet today, in 2015, more international policymakers at the G7 and the UN climate change negotiations are turning to index insurance as a financial solution for countries with populations at the greatest risk to climate change.
My research suggests that although index insurance for small farmers hasn't worked as a private market, this isn't a reason not to provide this coverage as an element of good social policy. However, the way that we currently do this transfers relatively little support to farmers themselves. And as the effects of climate change become more severe, insurance premiums will rise, meaning that farmers or donors will have to pay insurers more and more for the same amount of coverage. This means we have to think radically about ways to actually decrease farmers' vulnerability, rather than simply transferring ever-growing quantities of risk to the private sector. Simply because index insurance gives us a technical way to make payments to rural people following extreme events doesn't make it a quick fix for rural vulnerability, let alone for the global emissions inequalities at the root of climate change.